In Mexico's first election since the controversy of 43 missing students in Guerrero state, there were major upsets for the ruling Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PRI. While PRI candidates over the weekend retained their plurality in Congress, they did it only just barely. President Enrique Peña Nieto's party now has about 200 out of 500 congressional seats and has coalesced with smaller parties to retain a slim majority. The most prominent rejection of party politics was the election of independent candidate Jaime Rodriguez, aka El Bronco, as governor of the northern border state of Nuevo León. Rodriguez ousted a PRI candidate from that position and set off his election, quote, "I think in the whole country this will help the political parties to renew and transform themselves so that they can be better." It was the first time in Mexico's history that independent candidates were allowed to run and win. My guest is Laura Carlsen, director of the Mexico City-based Americas program of the Center for International Policy and a columnist for Foreign Policy in Focus, host of a program on Telesur English. Welcome to Uprising, Laura.
Thank you.
Now, was the political instability from last year's controversy over the violence in Guerrero and the missing 43 students, do you think that was largely responsible for the way these elections played out?
Well, I think it was a major factor because we saw incidents of violence and repression in various parts of the country. The boycott itself didn't end up being numerically significant in a lot of ways. There was about 48% turnout, which is for us and for most places pretty normal for midterm elections, which traditionally, of course, since they don't involve the presidency, attract less attention. But what we saw is a system that is in crisis in many ways. Although the president came out and said these elections were held, they were relatively peaceful, which was somewhat of an exaggeration because we have one young man who was killed in Guerrero by federal police, which is a fairly, very serious incident. And there have been many injuries, especially in conflicts and clashes with the teachers union. But essentially congratulating himself and his government for carrying out these elections, and then also referring to the fact that the PRI maintained their control as a sign that he will push forward on the structural reforms. But then you had this other side that was completely different, of demonstrations all over the country, not only against the political parties and the elections themselves, but also against those political reforms, those structural reforms, such as the privatization of oil and especially the privatization and reforms, so-called reforms in education that have a major labor impact on the teachers. And that voice was heard very clearly in the elections and also at the polls, with a certain degree of punishment for the PRI, and not only the PRI, but a certain punishment for all the major parties.